Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. The spooky season is upon us, and everybody's entitled to one good scare, right? On today's episode of Central Booking, Paul Brad Hogan, who co-wrote Halloween Ends and authored its official movie novelization. 44 years after babysitter Laurie Strode survived a Halloween night attack by Michael Myers that left 3 of her friends dead, and 4 years following a massacre that re-traumatized the small town of Haddonfield, she and the boogeyman come face to face one last time, even as a new evil threatens to take shape, threatening everything Laurie holds dear. In the end, only one of them will be left standing. Prior to his work on Halloween Ends, Paul, a Texas native who spent his formative years haunting a movie theater in Midland, wrote the screenplay for 2014's Manglehorn, which starred Al Pacino and Holly Hunter and was directed by David Gordon Green. His previous novels include Goodbye Horses and Hallelujah. The Halloween Ends novelization features original content and also adds context and color to story elements that were rewritten for or removed from the film's final cut. Bloody Disgusting noted, unrestrained by mainstream audience expectations, Logan fully commits to a coda that's only just hinted at in the final shot of the finished film. If you love Michael Myers, Laurie Strode, or any parts of the David Gordon Green trilogy, you should really give the Halloween Ends novelization a read. Without a doubt, Paul Brad Logan's take on Haddonfield in decline is a more than worthy addition to any slasher fiction or tie-in library. Now, Paul Brad Hogan spills the truth about Halloween Ends, just as our Halloween begins. And remember, the boogeyman is coming. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Central Booking. So it is Halloween season, and we always like to do at least one episode related to that. And I can't think of a better one because today I am in conversation with Paul Brad Logan, who is not only the author of the official Halloween Ends novelization, there it is, it's available on Kindle, paperback, audio as well, I believe. But not only do you have the distinction of writing this novelization, but you actually co-wrote the film itself, which is currently the #1 movie in America. That's pretty incredible. So thank you so much for sitting down and taking a little time with me today.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I love to talk about the movie. I'm very excited about it.
Good, me too. So I'm going to start with the obvious. I have to ask you, one, what initiated your involvement in Halloween Ends, the film, and how does the collaborative process work? Because you were a novelist as well, and usually, you're sort of writing in a vacuum until it comes time to edit. But this has 4 writers on the film, of which you were one. So how were you drawn into that? And then tell us about working with the others to create the vision for this movie.
David brought up the idea, shortly after Halloween 2018 came out, when he decided to go ahead and make a couple more sequels. And I had pitched some ideas for what could potentially be the second one, but then he got Scott Teams to come along and write that one, and then brought me and Chris out to Charleston beginning of 2019 to start developing what would be Halloween Ends. And yeah, I mean, writing novels, it's so fun. I love it. It's sort of it's a passion of mine. I love prose. Writing a screenplay is like such a different thing, but what I really appreciate is the collaborative aspects of it. I really like to throw out an idea and be challenged, and then to take different avenues to see where it'll lead us. And David's a very open. He creates an incredibly creative environment. So whenever we got down to start working on this, we really just opened this movie up to be whatever would come to us that would compel us to tell something that we all felt really strongly about, felt meaningful to us. And after a few weeks, we had this idea that we all got really excited about, and then we spent the next 4 years working on it. Writing it, rewriting it, passing it around, doing a reading with like the cinematographer Michael Simmons and the producer Attila and the sound mixer Chris Gebert and Richard Wright, the production designer. We'd all do these these group reads of it, and then really poke at it and challenge it and say, can this be better? Could this be different? Or what do you think about this? Does this, and so it's a very, and I don't know, it was constantly being like clay, just constantly being molded and sculpted into. I mean, even through the shoot, I was there and I was writing and rewriting every day on set. So it's just a really for anybody who enjoys creating something, it's the best possible place to be because you're just constantly engaged and excited. And David's always bringing in such an evocative new idea where you're like, oh, now I want it to be this, so yeah, I love it. It's so much fun.
That sounds like a really good time. And I wanted to ask you too, because you said, you ended up with a couple of years to work on this movie because originally the trilogy, as I understand it, was supposed to take place back to back to back, and Halloween Ends was going to immediately follow Halloween Kills. And then, of course, COVID happened. There was a production delay. And that probably opened the story up to entirely new directions that weren't initially on the table. So I'm wondering if you would just mind, talking about how the COVID delay actually benefited this film, maybe in terms of storytelling, allowing you to open it up in a way that would not have happened if this movie came right out after Halloween Kills, continuing that trajectory of the same night.
Well, that was something that was like I think misconstrued early on because we never actually had any version or even discussed any version where Halloween Ends would take place on the same night.
Oh, interesting.
I think the initial idea was, which ended up happening, was David planned to make Halloween and Halloween Kills. I think he wanted to make those back to back, like at the same time,
Right.
and they were always meant to be the same night. But he didn't want to get ahead of himself. He'd wait till the movie comes out and see if people responded to it before going on to make Halloween Kills. We had planned to make the films back to back, but ours was always meant to exist whatever year that it was going to be released.
Got it.
Which
Interesting.
before the COVID delay was going to be October 2021, I guess is what the initial release would have been, but then we got delayed, and so they were already doing pre-production and getting ready to go in the fall of 2020 to shoot it.
Right.
And once they made the decision to delay Kills, we said, oh, we've got another year to work on this. So, I mean, it continued that we didn't. I don't think we didn't really like change anything dramatically. We just took it apart and kept rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. I mean, I'm so happy to where we ended up.
Hmm.
I would love to have seen what it was in 2020 just out of curiosity because
Sure.
I've got over like 400 drafts of this screenplay, so I don't even remember where we were with this process whenever they were doing pre-production and rehearsing and stuff. So just as a curiosity, I would love to know what that would have been. But I feel so I love where it ended up. I love the movie. I really do.
That's awesome. And I have to say, I love that, you dared to be different, and it really is original and fresh. And that sort of leads me to my next question because, a franchise like this, the fan base is really passionate, really opinionated, and it has to be a very difficult balancing act to come up with something fresh and unique, but also to, try to deliver on expectations without being cliched, because you don't want people to feel like I've seen this movie before, but you probably can only stretch it out so far too, because you still want it to feel like a Halloween movie. So can you tell us a bit about, what were the discussions around that, and how many liberties did you feel comfortable with taking in this movie? Because it's a big and dramatic and different movie, but it's got so many great ideas. And if you watch it and rewatch it, you will pick up on things that you missed the first and second time.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little bit naive. Like I'm a huge Halloween fan myself. I've grown up on these movies. They've always been a part of my world. I've never known a Halloween holiday without a Halloween movie. And John Carpenter from a very early age informed almost like my cinematic lens. I watched all of his movies and pretty much succession of when they came out. I saw The Thing in the theater. I saw Christine in the theater. I saw Starman. They Live. What am I forgetting? Anyway, I didn't. I was a bit naive with thinking that we were doing anything that strange or different. Honestly, I just once we had the story, we were telling this story, and I think had I stopped and paused and been like, what are the expectations for this, that might have overwhelmed any of the creative propulsion. That can sort of become a limiting thing. At the end of the day, you have to tell a story, and if you I think if you're like, well, this has to be the perfect end to this, and it's got to be satisfy everybody's expectations and
Yeah,
stuff.
that'll never happen.
It'll never happen. You might satisfy these fans, you might satisfy these fans, or you might leave everybody a little bit cold because it's you're just making something to like a product as opposed to it sounds pretentious to say artistic endeavor, but that's what movies are, and so for me, I'm not going to be involved with anything that I'm not putting my heart into and I don't feel genuine about and passionate about telling. And I feel like that's where David and the other writers are as well. David's very good though about yeah, we are there's going to be certain elements that we are going to need to hit within this movie. Now let's figure out how to deliver those as organically within the context of the story we're telling as possible. I think David had probably a better idea of expectations and discourse and stuff. I was a little bit removed from that stuff. I don't really typically engage with that sort of stuff. I just watch movies and have my opinions and my loves and my interests and opinions and those sort of things. I don't it's a tough thing. I grew up in a time where we would watch a movie and if we didn't necessarily like it or it didn't strike us, like we would just sort of move on, and there
Right, and
wasn't
there
like
was no Twitter. It just, it
there
wasn't.
just wasn't. I mean, no disrespect to Ghostbusters 2, but Ghostbusters 1 was my favorite movie. And I
Right.
was so excited for Ghostbusters 2. And I knew Bobby Brown was going to be in it. And he had a single. And I think I started even crying during the movie because I was so unhappy. But when it ended, I was like, well, I'm just going to go watch Ghostbusters again because that's the movie I like.
That's the
Um,
beauty of it. You can love
yeah.
or hate any of these films, and it doesn't matter because you can enjoy any of them singularly, or you can take them,
But it's
into a
also the
conversation.
best thing is to have a reaction to something that you're watching. I think the worst thing possible would to just be watching something like, well, all right, like or
Yeah,
fall asleep or something. Like I would much rather cry during Ghostbusters 2,
right.
or I would rather be laughing and cheering during Ghostbusters 1984. I want either of those things. I want to be engaged. I want to be feel something.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, I would, rather have an opinion than be completely ambivalent because if you feel nothing, then it's kind of like, what's the point? But all right, I have to ask you, about writing for Jamie Lee Curtis is
Mhm.
Laurie Strode because that has to just be, you know, a wow moment knowing that you're doing that and she's going to be delivering, the lines that you're writing. But in this movie, and this is not a spoiler to say, but we find her at a point where she's trying to embrace normalcy. I mean, she's baking a pumpkin pie and
Yeah.
carving a jack-o'-lantern and she's a writer. She's finally writing what's meant to be her memoir. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about what you drew on as your life, in your life as a writer to inform that character and how that gave her both a sense of enlightenment and empowerment because she finds strength and courage through actually revisiting her story. And I
Yeah.
think as creatives and writers we probably respond to that in a way that others might not. But if you wouldn't mind, expounding on that for a minute.
Well, first off, she's a better writer than I am, because she's just sitting there like, oh, what's this? I'm gonna delete this. I'm gonna add this word. Whereas I'm like, laying on the ground and I'm an emotional mess and I'm like begging my girlfriend to like, what do I do? I don't know where this is. I don't know where I am. Like help. Lori's been through much more than I have, so she's a little bit more like she can probably deal with the frustrations of the writing process better than I can. But that's what I think it is. I think it's sort of a modern self-help technique to write your thoughts as a way to get a little bit of distance, as a way to process what you've gone through, and I think it's a very healthy thing that she's doing. And writing for her was I've just been very blessed working with David. 10 years ago I wrote a movie that called Manglehorn that starred Al Pacino and Holly Hunter, and so writing for these actors that I've grown up watching and that I adore is nothing like it. But just writing the name, typing the name Laurie Strode, or typing the shape, it's it takes you a little bit to get used to, you almost, you start out and you're like, oh, this feels weird. Like I almost want to change her name just to like, so I can keep going. So I keep, every time I stop, I'm like, oh, Laurie Strode, it's too big, it's like it's like writing for the most iconic movie characters of all time. It's just a like Rocky Balboa. I don't know how you do that. Um, Fortunately, there's three other writers to help you put you along. But yeah, it's just I mean, and to have her voice in your head, incredibly helpful. And then the excitement of saying, oh, let's see what Laurie Strode is like if she's done some work, some therapeutic work. She's gotten sober. Let's see what that version of her is in 2022 that is getting back to maybe a little bit of the innocence that she embodied in 1978. And I mean, I love her in 1978. She's such a beautiful character. Um, and Michael Myers is such a huge part of these movies. It's all slashers become Freddy or Jason or Michael. And I feel like over the course of the 80s, they all evolved into almost like these like giants, right? These almost like professional wrestlers with their one-liners and the way they move and stuff. And I think the beauty about what John Carpenter, Deborah Hill created with that first movie was this is a movie about a teenage babysitter, and evil comes into her life. He's not like the reigning champion of all killers. He's just a malevolent force of the personification of evil. And how do you deal with that when you haven't had to experience that or deal with the abject fear that he brings? So that was sort of going back to that, I think, initial concept, maybe on a subconscious level, was like,
Right.
this is her story, and what happens when this thing comes into her life.
Sure. It was so interesting to see, and I have to say, that pie came out worse than some of the characters. Characters
Yeah.
might have been mutilated, but what happened to that poor pie? But anyway, I digress. I do that a lot. I wanted to ask you too, you chose to introduce a new character, Corey, and he's really a focal point of this story too. So I'm wondering if you can talk about how introducing that character allowed you to expand, one, on some of the themes that you wanted to explore, but then also too, how that changes the dynamic between Laurie and Allison, because they are
Mm.
both involved with Corey as well. So he's his own character, but he's also sort of the third wheel in that relationship.
Well, okay. So to begin, it started very organically. We had that opening scene idea, and then we wanted to know who this character was. And after the massacre that took place in 2018, what the ramifications of that are on the town, and how this town is grieving and sort of rotting at its core and paranoid. And Michael's in the distance, invisibly sort of controlling this town. And so it was like an interesting character to put into that situation, and then a way to, it was organic. It wasn't anything I think we were discussing,
Sure.
but once we started it, it's like, oh, this is a great way to show Laurie and Allison's dynamic and their conflicts, and maybe where they both are, emotionally and mentally after 2018. And Corey's like a great character for us to insert into that situation, and amplify that and build to something. Yeah, it was all very organic. After the fact, I can kind of look at it and say, oh, I like that's a great way to verbalize or vocalize these ideas, and to have a character who can talk, and who
Right.
can
Yeah.
who can become something. If it is just Laurie and Allison and Michael Myers, I mean, I want to see that. Oh, sure. I mean, it's like My Dinner with Andre or something. I'm interested to see how you pull that off. But this was just, we just got so excited about this idea, and just really were in service of the story. Just how can we make this story the best story? And that's all we put our effort into.
Absolutely. And so I do want to ask you about the novelization specifically, because, one thing I find really interesting is that there's three movies, there's three novels written by three different authors,
Mhm.
and each one is exceptional in its own right. And not only is it complementary to the viewing experience, but it really, I think, enhances the viewing experience because you get more context, more color, things that you don't get to see in the movie. I mean, the movie would have to be 4 hours long to get the
Yeah,
kind of context that we get through
yeah.
this book. So, can you talk about, what is in this book that fleshes out what we see in the movie and things that we completely don't? Because I will tell people that your book starts, after kills in 2018. So we see what happens in the aftermath, of that massacre leading into the events of Halloween Ends. So what you don't see in the movie is in this book. And then there's a ton of other stuff as well, including Love Lives Today, which is sort of the other side of the coin
Oh
of
yeah,
Michael Dies Tonight. So if you wouldn't mind
yeah.
telling us, you know, what people who've seen the movie will get specifically out of this book in a broader context.
Sure. And I've never done a novelization before, and I think John and Tim, who wrote the other books, are those guys are just they're craftsmen. They're so skilled and talented at that, and I don't actually know how they did it. Because I just went in and I was like, well, I can only write a book. I'm just going to write a book, and I've got some source material here, but I'm just going to if I was just writing a book out of nowhere, this is how I would begin. And so it was a chance to I wanted to see some of Lori's recovery. I wanted to see how low she got before she was able to get back to where we see her at the beginning of the movie. Um, I wanted to see where Michael went. I love the movie. I love the mystery of it. I love that he's there. And in a movie, I think that's great. I love those ambiguities. I love those mysteries. I think they're wonderful. And I honestly don't think you need much more than what's in the movie for us to tell us where Lori and Allison are. And I think all that works great. I just wanted to know a little bit about their interiority. And I'm such a big fan of the character that Andy Matty created with Allison. I just really love that character. I really wanted to go into her interiority and see where she is mentally and really like get into that what led her into that relationship with Corey. And then while doing it, I've got this great device of these Lori's memoirs. And in the movie, it's very strategically used. It's used for voiceover. It's used to show like where we are and stuff. And I thought, well, I can use this here to actually go back into the past and explore some of the things that I think pay off in Halloween Ends. Specifically with bringing Dr. Loomis in. Like he's a character. Both he's a character in the modern day setting too. I think I have some stuff with Corey and him, but he's also there's some scenes of him in the early 80s and flashbacks to Lori in the early 80s where you get to see who she was a few years after living through the nightmare of 1978.
Mhm.
Those things were so much fun. And then just really getting to like, I love to develop a character. And so to give the vagabond a, a a birth and origin story and show a real psychic connection to him and Michael and how they what their relationship is is really exciting. And then even like there's a really minor character who's in the radio station who you just see briefly when Corey is spoiler alert Corey comes in and I give her basically an entire chapter, and because I want to, yeah, I don't know. I love examining everybody and giving them. I mean, I wish the book could be even longer, but yeah, I really go in depth with the characterizations and then the mythology and the lore of Halloween and Haddonfield, and yeah, I'm very
Yeah, it's
excited about it.
terrific. And there's
It's
so
so
many
fun.
Easter eggs. And, I watched the movie, as soon as it dropped on Peacock. And then the book was released a few days later. So then I read it and then I immediately watched the movie again. And I think that's almost the ideal way to do it because you have such an appreciation for nuance that might not come across if you haven't read the book, but there's sort of a whole backstory that you can glimpse once you've read the book and then you see the movie again. So I would encourage people, to actually maybe do it that way because it's like a whole expanded universe, even though it's the same story that there's just so much more to it. Um, in the novels, all three of them have just been outstanding, and it makes me miss the days where movie tie-ins were more prevalent than they are now.
Maybe it's a thing though. Maybe it's like a thing that's just going to. I mean, I'm sure. I don't know if every movie will get it,
Right.
but gosh, I would love every movie to get one. That would be incredible. So I love them. They're wonderful.
I totally agree. It seems like it's the reverse now. Like this used to be normal back in the day, and now everything's based on a book versus, a book being written after the movie's been in production. Man, I could talk to you all night, but you have life to get back to, and you've been, having a crazy schedule. So if you don't mind, I'm just gonna try to combine a couple questions quickly and just let you handle them, and then I will let you back to life. But one, I was wondering if you can tell us, a bit about your influences other than John Carpenter, authors, films, books, things that you may draw on for creative inspiration. And then final question, for people looking for guidance, advice about a creative or writing life, what is the best advice that you could give them, both that you have been given yourself and then that you were never given, and had to sort of learn throughout the process of writing
Hmm.
books and film? And if you need a reminder somewhere in your answer, because I know that was a lot,
Yeah.
just say, hey, I forgot your other question.
I mean, my influences are endless. In film, it's Robert Altman and Hal Ashby and David Lynch and Preston Sturges and Nicholas Ray, and I'm just gonna, yeah, just Michael Mann. I could list them forever. Books, Charles Portis and Cormac and Flannery O'Connor and Kurt Vonnegut, and again, Roald Dahl. I could just go on and on and on forever. Maybe one day I'll compile a list or something. I mean, we watched so many movies for this one, for inspiration, whether it was like Coppola's Rumblefish or Brian De Palma's The Untouchables, Grease 2, Chud, Eyes Without a Face. We had so many influences coming through. The advice I used to always wonder, like, what advice could you ever give anybody doing this thing? And then I had sort of an interesting experience writing Manglehorn for Al Pacino and Holly Hunter and Harmony and all of these heroes of mine. And up to that point, I'd been doing this my entire life. I've been writing since I was a child, right? And my only dream was to have a movie made. Once I have a movie made, then everything's gonna be incredible. And first movie at 36 that happens is directed by David, who's a friend and a hero of mine, and it stars my favorite actor in the world and one of my favorite other actors in the world with Holly. One of my favorite filmmakers is Harmony, and then Chris Messina's in it. Just so many incredible things, and then when it happened, I started to feel like an existential crisis because I was like, well, what am I supposed to feel now that this thing I dreamed of is happening? Okay, well, it's got to be, I guess, successful, or it's got to be all these things. And it's a very small movie. It came out, and a couple of months later, I was back at my minimum wage job,
Right.
working where I had been working prior to making this movie. And so I had to grapple with some things and be like, okay, went through a little bit of a depression and trying to, a therapy and working on myself and trying to figure out what those voids are in my life. I'm getting a little personal and deep, but I think this is helpful
Right.
for some people. And then one day I had an idea for a short story about like a film noir, but about a professional wrestler who's like just a heel. And I wrote it and I loved it and I loved the experience of it so much. It filled me with so much joy in just writing something that I didn't think anybody would ever look at. And it was like this incredibly profound wake up call that your success I think you should base your success. The be all end all of the whole thing should be the work,
Right.
just the work, the process, the making of the thing. Whatever happens is out of your control. You've got huge corporations out there like trying to make movies, and if everything was, if anybody knew how to do this correctly, every movie would be the biggest success in the world. But obviously, it's not. It's alchemical. You never know what's going to resonate and what's not. So I really do think making the work everything, and then just after that, it's out of your control. But if you can enjoy the process, that's it. That's all that matters. Just enjoy the experience of working. Sit down, write, and enjoy it. Paint, make a painting, and enjoy it. Don't sit there and say like, well, it's got to become this. It's got to make me money. It's got to make me a superstar. I've got to be heralded as the best. Just, I think once you love the work, then you'll live forever.
That's terrific advice. I really appreciate you going, deep on that, because I think that a lot of times, people are thinking about what comes next, or you get involved in all those expectations. But yeah, if you keep the love of the work as a focal point, that's outstanding. All right. I promised I will let you get back to
All
life,
right,
but I
buddy.
really appreciate you taking some time out. I hope
Yeah,
everybody will check out Halloween Ends the movie, and also Halloween Ends the novelization. You should really just check out both. They complement each other beautifully. Paul Brad Logan, thank you so much. Real pleasure.
yeah, of course. Thanks.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.